This is episode number 161 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast, one of the shooting world's biggest gun talk programs. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, law enforcement, and the firearms industry. But first, before we get started, here's a quick word about our sponsor, the R7 Mako by Kimber. The striker-fired R7 Mako is a high-capacity polymer micro-compact from Kimber. With the R7 Mako, you get 12 and 14-round total capacity from the flush and extended magazines, while the performance carry trigger has the smooth pull and clean break you'd expect from a high-end single-action handgun. The R7 Mako also comes optics ready, or you can have it with optics already installed. Kimber's R7 Mako will feed your appetite for something different. See how at r7mako.com. First off, you might notice I'm sounding a little snuffy. No, I wasn't up all night at a seedy bar. I'm just recovering from that flu that 89% of Americans seem to have at the moment. A few weeks ago, I bragged I've never missed a weekly show, and of course that streak came to an end as our monthly magazine deadline, a business trip, and the flu all simultaneously conspired to put the show on a one-week hiatus. Regardless, I think today is a fun show. It's kind of a stew of topics as I talk to Roy Huntington about, well, initially anyway, his new single-action revolver in 9mm. From there, we get into the whole idea of unusual calibers for the single action, and then we end up wading into a discussion of why certain guns come to market and others end up stuck in a drawer someplace. Now, let's start a new unbroken streak of episodes as I talk to Roy Huntington about Bizarro single-action calibers. Good afternoon, Roy.
Afternoon, sir.
Well, thanks for joining us on this, I guess you could call it the beginning of the holiday edition, as we now break into December and all the festivities that go on there. And we've got a big festival of weirdness today. It was Roy's suggestion. We talk about single actions in other calibers. And he's got one right there at his desk that inspired this talk. But before we got started, we were talking about, obviously everybody knows there's 22 long rifle and 4440 and things like that. But single action armies, model 1873s, or those type of pistols have been made in a whole lot of calibers. Some of them successful, many of them not. So let's take a little walk down memory lane and talk a little bit about that. So what's the one that's got you all hot and frothy at this very moment?
Well, first, I would just like to say that I am not John Taffin, and he could talk rings around us for this kind of stuff.
That's absolutely true.
But it just dawned on me because I got this single action, like an 1873 Colt clone, and it's extremely nice. I mean, I'm really impressed by it. It's smooth. The action's smooth. It's beautifully finished. It feels good in the hand, except it's in 9mm.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. And I ordered it on purpose because it was in 9mm.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was thinking there were some old days where Ruger, I think it was, did the Blackhawks, and he had some I forget, they had a name for it, but it was basically a combo, cylinder. So you would get a 357 and a 9mm cylinder. But evidently, the 9mm just never really shot that well, because I think there is actually a difference in one is like 355 and the other one's 357. Right. So but I still thought that it made sense, especially in those days of surplus ammunition. You could buy 9mm for a penny a round.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a lot of plinking. So I got this gun specifically. I'm going to target it really carefully. I'm going to try some different ammunition, and then everyone can read about it in Guns Magazine down the road. But it got me to thinking about alternate calibers or cartridges that have been chambered in these kind of guns. And so I started thinking about it, and I realized that there's this like whole hidden if, segment of shooting out there that I think gets ignored.
Well, I got to admit, I was having a hard time thinking about it. So walk us down that path of all these Bizarro calibers you've seen.
Well, I think something that's important for people to remember is, unlike a double action revolver, which needs, with rare exceptions, it needs the case rim so they can chamber the round and
Right.
headspace it correctly and all that kind of stuff. Well, with a single action, for some reason, I don't know why we don't do this in double action revolvers more. I guess the ejection thing. The single actions have a separate ejector rod.
Right.
So any case that can headspace on the case mouth can be chambered and fired very effectively and easily.
True.
Which means I've seen 45 ACP single actions. As a matter of fact, Thad Ribka, a famous leather maker, told me something that he did one time, and I thought, this is so clever. He had a 45 ACB convertibles. That's what they were called. Those Ruger guns. They were convertibles. Yeah, they had a convertible, cylinder. Well, he had one in 45 ACP, and he got a 1911 magazine and kind of spread the lips of it a little bit like an old magazine.
Okay.
So you could push the bullets out really easy.
Okay.
And he made himself a speed loader with it.
Oh, wow.
And so, see? So you put the gun on half cock, open up the loading gate, put the bullet into the chamber a little bit, flick it out from the magazine, turn it, flick the next one in. And he used to be able to go just like flick, 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 guns back reloaded. It was the coolest thing in the world. Yeah. Actually, I need to remember that because I've got a 9mm magazine. I may have to do that with this Taylor.
Wow.
But I got to thinking about it. I have seen single actions chambered in 25 ACP.
Really?
Yep.
I've never seen that one.
No, it was a custom gun.
Oh, okay.
It was one of those things like the Hamilton Bowen gun. He made a K-frame Smith & Wesson. I think it was a K-22 size gun, but he made it in 25 ACP, and he made his own full moon clips for it.
Jeez.
And as he told me, he says, I have no idea why I did this, just because you can.
Yeah.
But they've made, Ruger makes the single actions in 30 carbine.
Right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Which I have to say, if you've never fired one, it is a handful of fire and brimstone.
No doubt.
Yeah, because this is a cartridge that's made for a rifle-like barrel, clearly. Right. Yeah. And when you fire it out of one of these Ruger, Blackhawks, you get about 2 feet of flame out the muzzle.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on. Of course, 22 Magnum, but that's rimmed. I've seen them in rim fire rounds. Yeah. Which is a bit unusual. People don't think about that. And but basically, if it 32 ACP, 380 ACP, I actually fired one that was 380 ACP. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know that the 32 ACP is a semi-rimmed case. So if you have a 32 S&W or a 32 Magnum or something like that, chances are pretty good it'll shoot 32 ACP also.
Really?
I know, it's so hard to believe. They go bang. I mean, I wouldn't try to shoot the head off a grouse or something, with it, but they kind of go bang and they're kind of fun to do. I tried it at a Harrington Richardson gun that I had, and sure enough, it worked.
Really?
So,
wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some guns won't headspace correctly.
Yeah.
So all I know is that this has got me going down a whole nother path now, and I can see some weirdness in the future.
I was going to say, you've got a little sparkle in your eye that is kind of frightening in a guy that has access to a full machine shop.
Well, and think about this, is that you can have this 9mm gun. What I'm hoping, and I'm going to slug this barrel, is I'm hoping that the barrel is actually made for 9mm,
Mm-hmm.
Because if it is, then it's probably going to shoot really well. And but it got me to thinking. I thought, gosh, if you reload 9mm, guess what you could do? You could put a 140 lead semi-wad cutter.
Yeah.
Right? A hard cast lead semi-wad cutter. You could do a full wad cutter in 9mm. How cool is that? Right? Yeah, I mean,
you're out of control, Roy. You're just out of control.
I know. I mean, let's shoot one of the 38 special bullets, like a 158,
Yeah.
right? Maybe a kind of a heavy load. This is a pretty good sized single action, and there's a lot of steel in this chamber,
Yeah.
around the chambers because it's a 45 Colt size gun,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't know why, but it's just like, I think it's because you get to reach my age and we've been doing this for so long that you just, your mind spirals out of control on
Yeah.
these kind of things.
Well, I was going to say, not taking it in another direction, but you said something that I've always been intrigued about, and we're going to have to do a show about this, which is the one-off projects of famous gun makers. Because you've said it, I've seen it myself many, many times. We're blessed to know all these really famous guys who are just, wizards at building guns, restoring guns. And they always have this, hey, come over here and look at this. And they can't really put it out because it may be a little questionable in terms of safety or whatever, but they've always got a project like that going on. And that's probably why they are wizards at what they do. But you're the same way. You've always got a little project going on the side, and many of them can't see the light of day sometimes, but there's always something going on in the shop.
Well, in all my years in this industry, like you, I've toured gun factories all around the world. And you're right, there's always a moment when they realize, especially if they know, hey, this guy's really a gun guy.
Yeah.
He's not an influencer. He's not a this, he's not a that, sorry. But this guy actually was reloading his own ammunition 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's when they go, come here. And they open up a drawer, they unlock a door, and you go in there. And I did that one time at a collector's house. And this collector, I don't want to say the brand that he collected because he's famous.
I think I know who you're talking about, but go ahead.
I saw guns that I had no idea this company ever did.
Yeah.
And one-off guns, serial number one, stuff like that. And you just, it just left me speechless. Because first of all, especially in today's market, a lot of this stuff is viable.
Yeah.
It's like, if you brought this gun out, I remember a million years ago, I was at Ruger and I said something like, well, gosh, I mean, titanium, and they're like, yeah, we did that. We weren't really happy with it. And so sure enough, I mean, there's titanium guns, right? But Bill Ruger at the time just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So they didn't. Yeah. But they had the casting facilities, right? So they could do that. And I actually had a picture a reader sent years ago, and I think I actually published it in Handgunner years ago. And it was some, how when you cast things, they're on what do they call it? A Christmas tree or something like that, where all the parts are around a central core, right? And then it flows out. Well, it was kind of one of those that was cut up a little bit, but it was clearly Ruger double action guns. And this was a titanium casting. And they were cut up and stuff, you know, and it was thrown away and they got it out of the junk pile or something. But I thought, darn, you need to bring them now, and make them 25 ACP and 32 ACP.
Well, that brings up two more thoughts, which is, number one, a funny moment at a gun factory tour is, what's this? Over here, you'll see, but what's this? Over here, you'll see, so that.
Here, give that to me.
Yeah, give that to me. You didn't see that. And the other one, and I never thought about this, even though it's probably pretty obvious, is I bet because all these companies will build like 1-off or 5-off prototypes and test them. And I've been around when some of that stuff's been done, but I bet the vaults, I mean, those guns, they can't give them away, or they shouldn't give them away. And the engineers don't take them home. So they're sitting in a vault someplace. I'm sure you've probably run into that, Roy.
I've been fortunate enough to actually have a couple of those guns where they've sent them to me and they've said, hey, keep this under your hat. Let us know, should we do this or not?
Wow.
Well, a lot of times you get it and you go, oh no, don't do this. This is really bad. And fire the guy who thought of this, right?
Yeah.
But boy, every once in a while there's been more where it's like, this is really a cool thing.
Yeah.
And then you end up, they say they're not going to do it. And it's usually something silly like, marketing and they
Right.
can't make any money on it.
Yep. Yep.
And it's like, I tell them, that doesn't matter.
Yep.
It needs to be made.
And that's a good point when we're talking to readers a lot of times. Why don't they do this or why don't they do that? Well, odds are the big brains, especially the big gun companies, somebody's thought of it or presented them the idea, and they've done an economic study, and it's feasible from an engineering and building standpoint, but because it costs a bunch or there'd be so few sold, it doesn't make economic sense. Because after all, every gun company I know of is in the business to make money. They're not in the business to provide us things. They're in the business of business. So a lot of these cool ideas just never see the light of day.
I was in the Ruger booth one time about, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And in those days, they still had factory reps that were built with Bill Ruger from the time he started the company.
Right.
In the late 40s. And these are old, jaded, gnarly old guys. Right. And
chain smoking Pall Malls.
Oh yeah. But I remember I was chatting with one of them in the booth, and this guy came up and he goes, well, you ought to make this in left hand and in 730 waters, and you'd sell them, right? And without missing a beat, this guy, he paused from his conversation with me and he looked at this guy and he said, well, I'd sell you one.
Long pause.
and the guy just kind of little shuffled off.
Yeah.
And he said, trust me, that's why I hate the SHOT Show. It's constant.
Yeah. Well, gun guys tend to be that way because you like the 450 waters. You think every gun in creation ought to have the 450 waters, and the world's a little bigger than that.
Well, and look what we're talking about today. It's like, how silly is that? It's like, hey, let's make a single action in 25 ACP.
Yeah.
I like that idea. I may have to try to do that, for no good reason whatsoever. There's a major company in the industry that I've been chasing for the last 5 years to make a certain kind of gun style. Mm-hmm. I don't want to give it away just in case they do it. But they have the ability to do it, and it wouldn't be much of a change from one of their main products. And so they finally told me, because we went back and forth on it and stuff. And I even dummied up some pictures, and I said, just do this. Trust me, do this.
Yeah. And
it will sell. And they said, you're right. It absolutely will sell. This is a good idea. And it would sell, but we're not going to make it. And I said, well, why not? And it's because they're maxed out in manufacturing right now. And have been for the last few years.
Yep.
And they said, even though it seems easy, that still redesign the stock, and there's still, the R&D to go through, and there's marketing and support for packaging and distribution. And, it is that whole thing that you mentioned, and readers say, hey, well, can't you just make this in blue? Okay, well, you need to design it and get the color and how you're going to treat it and packaging for it and advertising and marketing. And it's just not that easy.
I heard a rep one time ask, I've heard that question far fewer times than you have, but I did hear it one time, and the rep said, what do we quit making? And the guy's like, what?
Yeah.
We don't have capacity. And that's what people tend to forget too, is you don't just buy a bunch of machines and go, now produce me a 9mm single action. You got to train the workers. You got to find them first. And that we all know that's a terrible problem nowadays, but you get them trained up. Of course, you got to do the engineering studies and design. You got to get the raw material. You got to figure out how you're all going to put it together. Like you said, packaging it, warehousing it, transporting it, and something even as simple as you got to train up your salespeople to understand what that gun is and who they're trying to sell to. And it's just a lot more complicated than folks would think. Like you said, just make it left-handed. Well, it's a lot more involved than that.
Well, you wonder, why doesn't everybody have a single action in 9mm, right? Because it seems like it's a no-brainer to me.
Exactly.
I mean, let's do this in 45 ACP. Let's do this in 9mm. Let's do it in 380. I mean, why not? But it's because each one of those is an ordeal, and so I won't hold my breath to see a single action in 25 ACP soon.
Well, and you there was another point I was going to hit too, and this comes from a story I'm working on right at the moment, and it's talking about Damascus steel. And I didn't realize until I got into the meat of this article. I never thought about it, but just something as simple as building a firearm or a knife out of Damascus steel is fraught with problems, because you're basically taking kind of pie dough and plastic or whatever, two very dissimilar kind of things, and putting them together. And then you got to do things like machining and heat treating, which each responds differently. And then you throw in things like titanium, which has different hardnesses, and the heat treating and all that's so different. So just saying, well, make this out of aluminum, make this out of titanium, it's a lot more complicated than just churning out part XYZ out of a new material.
Well, you're right. And I think we see that often in the industry. We're a little bit off topic here, but I think it's interesting.
We're rambling as usual.
Yeah. But I see it where you get a little teeny tiny startup, and they'll try to do something that we wish that they would do. Hey, make this out of carbon fiber, make this out of titanium. And you'll see this guy who has a passion for it, will get a little company off the ground, and then there you go. You see, fill in the blank made out of titanium, and then they're gone by next year, just because it's a big bite to do that. And the big companies, it's like when they tell me, oh yeah, we brought this gun out and it's been in R&D for 2 years, and they've invested $3.5 million to get it to the point where they have samples, and it's like, holy cow, that's why the big guys do it and the little guys don't.
Yep. Because you got to recoup that money before you make $1. And again, this is a business. This is not a charity.
Well, and a classic example of that right now is Automag. People have tried to bring the Automag back several times.
I was going to say, how many times? Yeah,
nobody with big bucks, though, because you just have to be able to absorb that right off the bat. And I hope the new company, they have shootable examples. And so I hope they make it. Actually, that's a couple more calibers would be good. The 44 Automag, the 357 Automag.
And the 9mm Automag.
Yep, there you go. The Wildies, the 45 Wildy Magnum was one, and they made a 9mm Magnum, which would be perfect for a single action.
I was going to say, I'm trying to wrangle this back on topic. So, Roy, you've got a full R&D staff at your disposal, a giant factory full of workers standing around looking on their phone, waiting on you to come up with this next brilliant design. So in a single action, what would that be?
I would like to see, actually, that 9mm Wildy Magnum cartridge is something interesting, because you're talking of, 145 or 50 grain bullet at 1,700 feet per second.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool if you think about it from a single action. It'd be safe, because the steel is really big, but gosh, there's so many things, though, I
just had a sudden thought. It's more marketing than anything else, and there'd be some significant technical problems, but I bet it would sell a gazillion units. A single action in 223.
I saw one time.
Are you kidding?
No.
Oh,
the problem was, though, is that 4 feet of flame that came out of the muzzle.
Exactly.
But you could have, they have those short barrel 223 loads nowadays.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
You could do that. Ruger made the 256, I think it was, I thought it was a great idea. They made the funny Hawkeye single shot pistol, looked like a revolver, but it was a single shot. And
I barely remember that one.
Yeah, it was the breech broke open sideways. It was really interesting. Yeah. And it died, of course, but I think it was a great idea and had a lot of potential. And, there was a bunch of like the 22, what was that one? The Jet, the Smith & Wesson made it, where they used 357 inserts, and then they had this other cartridge that they put inside. And so there were, a lot of these, it seemed like a good idea at the time, so.
And sadly, I think back in the day, whenever that day is to anybody, there was a lot more of that because the companies were maybe a little bit smaller, and somebody would, hey, let's try this, and there wasn't quite as much market research and all that kind of behind it. So I think sometimes some of those a little more out there kind of ideas did make it into production and sales, but nowadays it's such a business that you generally don't see those kind of things much anymore.
No, in the old days, if Bill Ruger said, "We're going to make this rifle," and
That's
what
who I was
happened,
thinking
right?
of.
And
But
other
that will
guys
work.
who,
I don't care. I
yeah,
want it.
and the other guys would just say, "I just have a feeling they would like this." But you're right. Nowadays, the first $100,000 is spent on marketing surveys and that kind
Yep.
of stuff. So, oh, you know what? It just dawned on me too. Well, you know what would be a perfect gun and caliber combination would be a single action, like a Ruger single 6 size gun,
Uh-huh.
so like the 22 frame
Yeah.
kind of, in 32 H&R Magnum, which they make
Yeah.
or have made. I have one. It's wonderful. And in that you can shoot 32s, special 32, I mean,
Right.
all the 32s, right?
Yeah.
It'll do that. 327 Federal if it's chambered for that. But then you could have another cylinder for it. That would be for the new 30 Super Carry.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. And so that's a pretty hot little cartridge.
Yeah.
So of course as the guy would say, well, we'd sell you one.
No, that
right.
truly, that one might, you need to patent that as soon as we get off the call here.
Well, wait till you see my 9mm cartridges loaded with 140 grain lead semi-wad cutters. All you semi-auto shooters, eat your heart out.
Oh, Roy, like I said, you got that twinkle in your eye, and who knows where this is going to stop.
Can we end it with my contender story that I told you just a few minutes ago? Okay. Yeah. So there's this other guy, and he geeks out over contenders the same way I do.
And he's a famous guy.
He's a famous guy.
He's done a lot.
We tend to try to one-off up each other, but he beats, we're talking hundreds of contender barrels and calibers. But he sent me a picture the other day, and there's a little short contender barrel with iron sights on, and right on the side it's etched 25 ACP. And I wanted it so bad. I called him up. I said, you have to sell that to me right now, immediately. And he said, heck no, man, I'm still geeking on it here. And in the picture, he's got like 8 or 10 boxes of different kinds of 25 ACP ammunition, and he said, you don't even think about it till I'm done playing with this. But I thought, why on earth did these two normal adult men, we both lost our mind over the fact this is a single shot 25 ACP contender. Oh my God, we both want it bad.
Well, I've often said guys of a certain age, our age, is a complex biological machine being operated by earthworms or 12-year-old boys.
And we're 12.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Well, that was interesting. And we went about 52 different directions there, but I think it was pretty interesting, and hopefully our listeners got a kick out of it. And I've taken copious notes here. I think we came up with about 10 different topics for future podcasts. So, and, I think that's one of the reasons this podcast is successful, and especially with Roy as a guest, because we're just guys talking about guns. I got no agenda here. I try to let the guests do all the talking. And, when you got a guy like Roy Huntington, who's been there, done that, wore out about 50 T-shirts and continues to be a very important part of the firearms industry, it's always interesting to hear what you're working on, even if it's a 25 contender or a 9mm single action. So thanks for joining us, Roy.
Man, you're always too kind. I appreciate it. Let's do this again.
Will do. If there's a topic you want to hear, someone you'd like us to interview, or you just want to share your thoughts, please drop me a line at editor@gunsmagazine.com. As always, you can find us on your favorite podcast directory, such as Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and several others. And there's also YouTube, and you can listen to us at gunsmagazine.com. You can also subscribe to the Gun Cranks audio podcast on those same directories, or you can watch it at the Gun Cranks YouTube channel. And while you're online, please don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available for sale on our websites and at Amazon. I'd also like to remind you to visit our sponsor, the R7 Mako by Kimber. You can do that by visiting r7mako.com. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.